Good morning, everyone. After preparing some introductory videos, we will try to explain today in even more detail the reasons that lead an athlete to suffer muscle injuries of indirect type. This video is therefore aimed at the athletes themselves, their coaches, managers, journalists, and not least the fans. As we will see, it cannot always be bad luck or fragile muscles of the athlete himself or herself. Indirect injuries are injuries that arise without any apparent trauma, differently from the direct ones that can arise from a game clash with a knee on a thigh muscle, for example. In the indirect injury, the athlete runs, accelerates, decelerates, and hurts himself or herself. They can be structural if after the injury lesions appear at the examinations, or they are defined as non-structural if the muscle encounters a suffering or a muscle contracture. The recovery times will inevitably be different in relation to injury or absence of injury. But the question that everyone asks is always the same one: why this happens, and why does that athlete suffer much more often muscle injuries than other athletes. Remember that professional athletes are totally followed from the medical and nutritional point of view, so we cannot assume for them the deficiency of vitamins and minerals. There are reasons why, and need to be sought more deeply. If relapses always affect the same muscle, someone could hypothesize ineffective therapies. But when relapses involve adjacent muscles or muscles of the opposite limb, a different explanation is needed. It can't always be fragile muscles or bad luck picking on that athlete. Let me specify that an athlete can suffer muscle injuries even if at the top of his or her fitness and after an ultrasound or an MRI had certified that those muscle fibers were in without any damage. So before illustrating to you which are the causes that are often ignored but that affect in the muscle injuries problems, we will try to recap on the programs of prevention usually applied. This step is crucial to understand the rest of this video. The prevention includes two fundamental chapters: the workouts for muscle strength and the ones for neuromotor control, that is, the research for the best muscle response in the various game situations, both related to the technical gesture and the variables pertinent to the control and stability of the body. Warm-up programs for warm-up and exercises for core stability are well provided, that is, for the stabilization of the trunk and pelvis, thus reducing the situations in which the muscles must intervene in an uncoordinated way for the control of the balance. Also fundamental are the exercises that will work the various muscle groups with eccentric contractions, able to strengthen and stretch the muscles themselves. Obviously, muscle massages, discharge postures, stretching, and group exercises are used to maintain joint mobility. It is also used the cryosauna to reduce the inflammatory components of the muscles after the effort through a process that increases the microcirculation and disposal of catabolites, that's to say, scoria produced by the muscles. All this has been largely perfected by the athletic and health staff of each team, because they are totally aware that without these attentions, injuries would increase dramatically. The problem, however, continues to affect athletes, putting in difficulty even medical staff of well-known competence, of illustrious fame, having all the diagnostic possibilities to try to understand what happened on that athlete. Although it may seem superfluous, it is important for me to point out that the muscle gives in due to stresses that it has not endured. And often these stresses are not exaggerated, they are compatible with that activity, with that technical gesture, and with the workouts performed. Then the question to be asked is one and one only: why did that muscle not bear normal stresses, in itself not exaggerated and tolerated by other companions? An athlete, to train, to run, to jump, to decelerate, to kick, definitely needs the maximum physical strength and the best neuromotor control, developed with all the various workouts programmed specifically for this. However, a differentiation must be made. If an athlete would match the theoretical model of postural perfection and symmetry, the prevention programs that train the strength and the neuromotor performance would probably be sufficient for optimal prevention. But even the professional athlete, regardless of his level of preparation, deviates from the theoretical model of postural symmetry and presents small irregularities, small asymmetries, small dysfunctions. Instead of being the ultimate expression of symmetry and functionality, it can be like this, or like this, or like this. Of course, we have other cases than those illustrated. All this happens even if he or she is in excellent physical shape, ready to take to the field with maximum competition to give his or her best in the game. What are these marks on the joints? They are indicators, but they don't refer to structural anomalies that would be highlighted by radiological tests. They are dysfunctions that condition the musculoskeletal response of that athlete, with no symptoms locally. So those joints may have a problem, but the athlete isn't aware of it because he doesn't have any local ailment. Compared to the theoretical model, their presence, the sum of the dysfunctions given by their presence, causes the athlete to tolerate less well the mechanical stresses that the musculoskeletal apparatus undergoes. In this example, we can clearly differentiate the neuromotor control of the athlete to manage the bike from the dumping of the stresses that the bike implements in the impact with the ground. In the human body, the set of joints between the lumbar spine, pelvis and lower limbs creates a cushioning system comparable to the one in the motorcycle we have seen as an example. This function can be ascribable to what physiologists call the articular play, that is, the small movement of the articular heads without there being any obvious movement on that joint. It is precisely the articular play. To better explain this concept, I refer you to this video already available on YouTube. Now, to realize how the sum of these dysfunctions affects the musculoskeletal system, let's make some very simple examples. You are bike riding down a dirt track in the mountains. The first downhill you will do will be on a bike prepared for off-road activities. The second downhill is on an old bike, a bike without any kind of shock absorber. During this second descent, who's going to stabilize your body from the inevitable oscillations coming on the seat and on the handlebar? That's right, your muscles will work the most. It is clear that on a football field the stresses are radically different from what happens in the example I have just given to you, but the nature of the problem is the same. The sum of the various asymptomatic dysfunctions inevitably present in the skeletal apparatus of each one of us, associated with the sum of the stresses that the athlete imprints and undergoes in training and competitions, will inevitably create a problem. A professional athlete who often suffers muscle injuries is certainly conditioned by these phenomena. Let's see why. Strength training, workouts for maximum neuromotor training, stretching, joint mobility exercises, and everything that is done by the athlete to recover better and keep elastic cannot nullify the smallest joint asymmetries and these asymptomatic dysfunctions, and this means that the athlete can suffer overloads that may be related to that muscle district, which will then suffer, but which are not absolute overloads, as if the athlete had been exposed to loads which he could not tolerate. Stretching, massage, mobility exercises do not allow to rebalance these components that, as it usually emerges in the analysis phase, need a causal actions technique, targeted and above all with a work that is asymmetrical in line with what emerged during the analysis phase. Otherwise, it will be like trying to lubricate a gear that works badly, putting lubricating oil, but without doing anything to establish the correct setup. All this until the day X or Y that athlete develops an indirect muscle injury. It could be in the warm-up, it could be in a sudden movement he is always taking on the field to chase the ball. It could be in a lot of other little situations that you've all seen during the game and that impose a game stop. In these cases, the muscle collapses like the fuse of an electrical system. What happens after an injury? Diagnostic tests and athletic tests will enable the return to the soccer field until what many call bad luck will again attack that athlete, perhaps on the muscle or the other limb. There are athletes who have lost the opportunity to play tournaments or important matches, others who have been given away by the companies that have the card at least to save their rich engagement. The press defines them as athletes with fragile muscles, but it is not so. In truth, the evaluation protocols are the ones to be weak which, although they comply with the guidelines, are not able to bring out all the components that have a role in negatively modulating the stresses that the musculoskeletal system undergoes. Now, theory or reality? We are not talking about phenomena of strange or infrequent malfunctions. We are talking about very frequent malfunctions, which compared to a person who does not train, who does not do sports, in the athlete remains very often asymptomatic because mobility exercises and stretching and everything done on the soccer field during the recovery sport allows in any case to have a good functioning as regards physical performance. But the dysfunction remains, and remains until eventually that area can become painful and will be the subject of localized care with local manipulative techniques, with laser, with other physiotherapy tools, but without having the broader vision of what happens in that musculoskeletal system when it is subjected to impacts, to accelerations, to decelerations. Without this broader vision, these will remain analytical therapies without intervening in a causal way on all the components that instead expose the athlete to indirect muscle injuries. We have already explained it. Being dysfunctions, they are not visible to instrumental examinations, and instrumental examinations is a photograph, and a picture cannot, for example, certify if a guitar or a violoncello are tuned. Similarly, an MRI or an ultrasound cannot show if in dynamics, during the stresses that musculoskeletal system works optimally in response to all the stresses it receives. Medicine is rich in these examples. We all have someone in our families who has suffered from ailments, and the exams have not explained the reasons why. A person can feel bad without being sick with a pathology. We could cite, for example, the common headache. We could put For example, the case of a sciatic pain without a herniated disc has been detected. We could talk about other cases where people have migrant pains, variable, and all the tests are negative. Muscle injuries also fall under this specific example, where there is a problem but there is no disease. In the cases I previously mentioned, dysfunction can simply create pains, disorders that can then return. In this case, the dysfunction associated with the sum of the stresses suffered by the athlete in training and competition can lead to real documentable injuries when the muscle undergoes a tear, a stretch. Thus, an initial functional problem becomes a real injury, especially if in that athlete exposed to relapses and frequent injuries, all the causes that intervene in this problem are not identified. To fully understand the mechanism underlying the problem of muscular accidents, it is evident now more than ever that it is necessary to expand the analysis model by inserting parameters, notions that are fundamental in other sciences such as physics and biomechanics, and must be analyzed in depth to fully understand the phenomenon. I have presented some fundamental concepts. I hope to make it understand, but is it possible that in the staff of professionals these concepts are neglected? Unfortunately, yes. Basically, there are two reasons for this. If an athlete does not have problematic tests that highlight a pathology, he or she is considered healthy, and it is so indeed. But the dysfunctions are not detected. They happen in dynamics. I have already explained it before. They cannot be highlighted by static examinations such as an ultrasound or as an MRI. From the therapeutic point of view, the techniques that allow to intervene on these dysfunctions refer to physiotherapy or postural re-education, to osteopathy, to manual therapy, all procedures that are usually present in the staff, but then depends on what is the analysis that is done upstream. If the techniques I have mentioned are applied for analytical treatments in relation to any problems or district pains, this is still a partial treatment. There is no broader analysis of what that athlete needs to regulate, to modulate his setup, and to improve the distribution of stresses in dynamics. We therefore need a wider analysis, certainly made with all the suitable experience, to know where and how to intervene on which joint districts. Once again, often asymptomatic, but intimately linked to the stresses that the athlete imprints and undergoes in training and in competition. In conclusion, there are other aspects that interfere in the physique of an athlete and that negatively modulate the response of the system to the stresses that the athlete imprints and undergoes. The interfering combinations can be many, and for each athlete it is essential to know what we can define as the biomechanical code at the base of his dysfunctions, which will lead a musculoskeletal system, even if duly trained, to suffer frequent muscle injuries. Knowing this code, this disturbed mode of operation compared to the optimal situation is of radical importance to strengthen the effectiveness of prevention programs. Without these considerations, without these integrations in the evaluation and analysis process, the risk is to see the athlete who will keep on suffering muscle injuries. In this case happens what we have already seen cyclically. The staff is blamed, bad luck is blamed. Someone can blame the fragile muscles of the athlete, but the problem is a myopia in the evaluation protocols. I thank you for your attention. See you at the next video. If you have liked this one, please do not forget to put a like, and for any question you can write to the email below. And until next time, bye bye.